You can use the thing in the canvas, you could go to the URL. I'm just gonna sit here refreshing till it hits some number that I think reflects some of the students here right now, having done the student eval.
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
Yes, yes, if you've already done it, who here has already done the student eval for the class? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 brownie points distributed. Okay, you can sit around, you can kind of dance to music only you can hear, you can do whatever you want. Everyone else, please get out your laptop and do the student evals. I will tell you why we're so insistent on them. You might imagine that universities are about teaching you stuff. They are, sort of. And therefore, us profs, we're evaluated on the quality of our teaching by student evals. Now, you might think this is a pretty dumb way to evaluate the quality of the teaching, but it's the only way we've got. So, we use these student evals. I read all of them. I believe the director of the School of Computing, Mary Hall, also reads all of them. It's a lot of reading. Some of you will write sort of 3-page long rants. That's fine. I mean, hey, whatever your heart desires, okay? It's a free country. I will read it. And then I use that information to improve the class for next year. For example, last year, I used Discord instead of Piazza, and I got blamed for it in the student eval. People did not like that. So now you have Piazza. Now, if you hate Piazza, you know what to do, okay? You can force me to find yet another group chat software for next year.
Also got blamed on Rate My Professor for using Discord.
What? Awesome. Yeah. So amusingly, roasting me on Rate My Professor does nothing whatsoever because no one cares about it. Yeah. However, your student evals will be read by me. I will attempt to use them to improve for next year. Mary, the director, will use it to determine how to improve for next year. We use it for curriculum planning. Like if everyone hates a class like 2100, we will constantly twiddle with it in ways that do not improve student evals, but we're trying, folks, okay? This class is a new class. Your student eval can have an unusually powerful effect on it. They're also used to, I don't know, determine, like distribute awards and prizes and raises and promotions and all sorts of things. They go in our permanent record as faculty. By which I mean into the file of like, you know, how good we are doing at our jobs. So yeah, they matter. Please fill them out. Obviously, if you're going to say something bad and you're feeling lazy, don't fill them out. But if you're going to say something good, definitely fill them out. No, I can't really discriminate. I cannot see who wrote what. They're anonymous. So you don't have to worry about that. So there's 60 people here. See all of you. And I'll wait till some good fraction of that has filled it out. And then we can review. The faster we can do it, the more we can review. Well, I think we'll have enough time to do all the review. Okay.
Like an audio from No, you have to get a certain number of times.
That's right.
The exchange.
That's right.
Programs really shut down.
My wife's job used to have a brownie point system, and he had 300 of them. He got a Nintendo Switch. And my wife was really excited about this. She got the Nintendo Switch when she had 800 brownie points because they kept bumping the amount you needed to get the Switch.
I don't know if it's gonna.
They just been
Yeah, it's over. One of the excited. So you were charging in this room.
No, this is my database.
Got people filling them out, so that's good. I will stop at some unspecified point. Do you think like the
averages, like, that people actually fill these out? Like, what do you guys?
Oh, it's like what the average response rate is?
Yeah.
I think 25%.
Yeah, they do.
Or 400's curving the entire.
I've done that for a while, and it has not helped.
They're curving the final grade 4,400, they get 75%.
Probably.
Okay, I'm curving your final grade, by which I mean, if we don't do this, we're not gonna get to the review ever.
Yeah, that is a curve.
Yeah. What is it? Great, average. I mean, that means,
Thoughts with that?
yeah, because I mean, just like, how many students average for the most CS classes, like.
It really depends on the class.
I guess like for the core classes, I would about. It's probably more now. That's fine.
And when we read these and look at the scores, we do try to take into account things like lower level classes have lower scores, bigger classes have lower response rates. Anyone you fail for cheating will give you a flat 0. So we subtract that out. That's fair. All right, I think when we get to 45 responded, I'm gonna call it. That's very achievable. If you are finished, one of the things you can do is you could watch me click the refresh button and the page update without refreshing the whole page, and think about how you'd implement that using Ajax.
Ooh,
Very terrible with Ajax. I wouldn't use Ajax.
I exclude you.
Yeah.
Well, sure.
No, I don't.
Those of you who are done, I don't think it'll take that much longer, so thank you for holding on. Seven away. Four away. You are still working on it. You can be one of the lucky 4.
I mean,
It's 800.
yeah, so we don't want this to like.
3 left. One left. Oh, all right. Whoever just submitted it, thank you. You are the 45th caller. You get a brownie point, which we've already established. Cannot be exchanged for a brownie. All right, so I'm gonna move on to the rest of the review. Now, if you're still in progress on your student evals, please do complete them. They do matter. Again, I will read every single one of them and think about it. If it's like 3 pages, I will read it. I won't be super happy about it, but I will read it. You typically get one of those every year when you teach a big class. They're usually wild rants. Sometimes, if they're really good, we share them with other faculty. But I will read all of them, and I do actually make changes to the class based on what you all suggest. things that didn't go well, things that did go well. And of course, we make sort of larger curriculum decisions as a school based on those as well. So thank you for doing those. Now some quick reminders about the final, just so that, you know, I get these out there. First of all, the final will be right here. When I showed the slides on Monday, it said L104. It is not in L104. It is in L101. It's right here. It's always been right here, your normal classroom. It is from 6 to 8, so it's like even later than the class normally is. So, you know, bring whatever you need to like fuel up. The exam is something like 75% new, 25% old, by which I mean material that was also in scope for the midterm. And that's kind of a vague notion because, like, you know, if I had you write some HTML for like a form, it might also be some HTML like for HTML. So there's a little bit of cumulative, but it is mostly balanced toward the new stuff. The other thing I wanted to call out is any regrade requests for homeworks 1 through 6 must be done by Friday. Also, the midterm is included. So on Friday, I will turn off regrade requests for homeworks 1 through 6. If you still think you deserve a regrade, you will send me an email, and then I will tell you no. But if it helps you feel better, that's fine. All right, totally willing. The point of this is that we have a pretty tight schedule to get the final graded, get final grades computed for everyone, deal with all of y'all's regrades on the final on homework 7, and then submit grades on time. So I'm trying to get as much grading out of the way and as much possible email out of the way. I know how it works. I finished computing your final grade. You have you know, an 86.3, and you figure, you know, if you just ask for a regrade request on every point you've ever lost, maybe you'll get to an 87. You're laughing, but people do this. Okay, you wake up one day, you've got 64 regrade requests, all from the same person. That's another thing I'm hoping to do. So again, by Friday, strongly recommend, if you have some time, go through your homeworks 1 through 6 or your midterm, anything that you felt like that you didn't go through, maybe go through them and ask for regrade requests because I will be turning them off. Any other questions about the midterm administrative wise? Okay. The other thing I can say, the practice final, any questions about the final administrative wise? The practice final is out. Who here has taken a look at the practice final? Okay, great. I see a lot of people haven't yet. That's good. It means you're planning to study and then use that practice final as like an almost final evaluation of where you are. That's a good way to do it. One thing I want to call out is that the first page of the final, of the practice final, is identical to the first page of the actual final. So the rules will be the same. If you're, you know, worried about those and want to refamiliarize yourself. With that, let us move on to some review. So today we're going to review JavaScript and then we're going to review cloud stuff. That's kind of the agenda. So let's get to it. And we'll do it like normal. I'll put questions up, I'll ask you to think about them, and then give you some time to do that. There we go. All right. So let's begin. I got 3 simple questions about JavaScript. I'm going to give you 20 seconds.
What if we're on the 9 cents? And that's exciting. We'll just go short answer.
All right. Let's go through some rough answers. So every time that you click on a link or submit a form without JavaScript, that involves making a network request to the server, waiting to receive a whole new web page back, and the browser parsing and redisplaying that web page from scratch. That makes it pretty slow. With JavaScript, we skip all those steps, so we can have much lower latency to the end user. And specifically a network request, 100 milliseconds would be pretty good for a network request, and 1 second, that's pretty common. This is too long for any like smooth or interactive user interface. JavaScript, you could say, if you said 1 millisecond, I'd accept that because that's probably how long JavaScript itself takes to run. But you're probably displaying the screen at 60 frames per second, and JavaScript can totally hit that 60 frame per second mark. So that's fast enough for any interaction, even really latency sensitive ones like drag and drop. Or like drawing stuff, recognizing pen strokes, etc. All right. Well, let's think about script tags for 15 seconds.
I think it's fine.
Yeah.
All right. So here's what that looks like. You have the script tag. You have type equals module. If you want to include something as a module, you got to write type equals module. In this class, we're always including stuff as modules. But if you don't put type equals module, it does some weirder, older thing that's bad. Kind of classic JavaScript stuff. You use source equals on script tags. So here I've got source equals and then that URL. And then this is super important. You got to put the closed script tag. If you don't put the closed script tag, it assumes that everything that comes after it is JavaScript for some weird reason. And it probably isn't, so it'll get confused. Okay. Let's talk about jQuery methods. I've got a bunch here. You could trade off left column versus right column if you'd like.
There's a dot value.
This is
There's like text and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a.
All right, let's go through a couple of these. So if you want to create a new element, that's actually just the $sign function with HTML inside a string. When you do that, by the way, be careful if you're using like double quotes in the HTML, then that'll actually end the string, so you probably don't want that. To select descendants of an element, you call .find. So .find says if you do something .find, you're looking for all children of the something that match a selector. So in here, you put a selector. You've got append, prepend, and before, after. I sometimes see people confuse these. Append adds a child to the container. So if you can say something like list, ul.append li tag. And that adds another child to the end of the element. Append adds to the end of the element. Before and after add before and after the element. So easy to confuse these. You can give these an argument, which is a string of an element to create, or you could just give an existing element, or you could create an element using the $sign stuff there. And to delete an element, you can use remove. On the right-hand side, we're talking about various accessors of the element. So if you have an input element, you can call .val. That'll get you the value of the input element. Like, for example, what the user has typed into the text box. You can use add class and remove class to manipulate the classes of an element. You can do .text to change the text contents of an element. And you can use .data either to read or to write these special data attributes. So if I want to read data-xyz, I call .data and parens the string xyz. If I want to set the value of that data xyz attribute, I do .data xyz, comma, and then the new value. And you can get the children of an element with .children. Now, one thing that you're expected to do is not just kind of know how to match these to definitions, but also to somewhat comfortably use these in a program. So for example, if I say like, for each, list item, find the child which has class so-and-so and change its text to so-and-so. Then what I'm expecting you to be able to do is like select every list item and then do a for loop. And then for each of them, you have to find a descendant that has a class of so-and-so. So you got to use the dot find there. And then you got to change the text to so-and-so, and you'll call dot text as well. So you're going to want to be able to string these together for larger programs. All right. What's going on? So let's do a couple of examples of that. I've got go ahead. They tell us, right?
Yeah,
So this is.
selecting that particular things would be everything you're probably not gonna have like one of the TR, so you want to get children of it. So like you.
Yeah. Get the last.
Get the last.
Yeah. For the bottom one, you just do you do the root dot line for each time. Yeah. That's like yeah. Also value on, but like that.
All right. So a reminder that maybe you're sitting next to someone, you guys can maybe trade off on who does which problem or whatever. There's definitely a bunch of different ways that you could achieve any of these goals. Here's one option. So here I'm using a special selector to select the last child of every table row. That's one way to do it if you know about the last child selector. Another thing you could do is you could select table rows, loop over each of them, and select the dot children, get the last one, and call remove. So that's a little more like this for loop down here. Here I've selected all of the button elements. Then I loop over those button elements. And for each one, I call the dot text function. Remember, with the dot text function, if you call it with no arguments, it gives you the current text contents. If you call it with arguments, it changes the text contents. So this for loop style one, this one with the special selector, they both work fine. If I ask you a question like this, I'll accept. In general, on the exam, I'll accept anything that actually works. So, if you want to be super clever and do something weird, we will give you points, possibly after a regrade request. But it's helpful for me to point out a couple of additional things about JavaScript. You see that here I have a for loop. I'm declaring all of my variables with let. There's some weird subtle bugs that avoids. You'll see that here I'm looping using let of. There's other ways of looping that are weird and different in various ways if you would like. So remembering those rules, we're not explicitly testing for the rules I gave you on how to stay sane while running JavaScript, but we're implicitly testing them because if you write JavaScript that runs into one of these funny bugs from not following the rules, then that'll be on you.
When we is that for that button's like list? Isn't each button inside of there not just a jQuery element? It's just a raw HTML element. Like, would you have to rewrap the
That
button?
might be correct. I think you're right.
Okay.
I will re-upload these in the class. So again, there's typically more than one way to do things. Either way will work fine. Right? Now let's build up from there to some event handlers.
Yeah. Well, you can just select the toggle.
Yeah, my toggle, like the open class with that jQuery.
Yeah. Nice. It is. Oh, okay, yeah, it's. I just got it. See, it's big.
All right, so let's walk through this one. I think I do this one step. Oh, I don't. Okay. Okay, so here's a simple event handler. First, I select the dot toggle element and I add a click handler. And then inside, and to add a click handler, use this dot on method. So select the toggle on click. We're going to run this callback. And you're going to want to remember the syntax for callbacks. And inside the callback, what I'm doing is I am selecting the details element and toggling the open class. This is a simpler click handler. Let me pause here for questions because we've been through a number of these JavaScript slides.
We forgot semicolon when we get marked off.
No, because they're not required in JavaScript. But if you do whatever weird thing causes JavaScript to put the semicolon in the wrong place, then I will have a laugh while grading. But yeah, in general, we will try not to take off. Look, when we give partial credit, we're trying to think, did you think about this the right way? How much of the stuff we're testing for did we actually know? Did you actually know? And semicolons are mostly not in. Other questions? Cool. Yep, Alan.
Is total class the same as just doing add class and remove class?
That's right. It just adds or removes the class based on whether or not it currently has the class. Okay. So here's a more complicated example. Here, there's going to be a form. And it's going to contain an element with the ID signature. You want to make sure that the form cannot be submitted unless the signature input element has a value of Joanne Smith. And if so these are attempts to submit the form, place the find the output element and replace its contents with no signature. And note the inside that form. So you should write code that might work if there's more than one of these forms on the page. You might want to just talk through with your partner going back and forth various elements that you have to make sure to add to the code.
Select all the form element, $sign, parentheses. Submit. Inside of that, we would get the signature on, see if that is equal to conditional block. If it doesn't go back, then we'll just, but if it's not, then we'll grab that. So tell us inside. So you can form the dots line. Like we have the event, sorry, so we go event dots. Yeah, and then we can just replace the text there. And then we can also do like event dot provision or false.
All right, so let me step through my solution. Okay, so here we are selecting every form on the page and adding a submit handler. Reminder that the submit event occurs when the user decides to submit the form before the browser goes ahead and actually makes the post request and whatever else the form submission involves. So we're going to intercept the form submission and we're going to run this code in the middle. There's a bunch of steps going on here. The first one is we want to check whether the signature element has a value of Joanne Smith. So here I select the signature element using this $selector and get the value of that input element with .val. This is, by the way, what I meant when I said we're testing you on these jQuery methods, but also on your ability to chain them together into something more complicated. So here I first check whether the signature element has a value of Joanne Smith. And then if it doesn't, we need to prevent the form from being submitted and replace the contents of the output element inside that form with no signature. So here's that second step. I'm going to take the current form being submitted. Reminder, you can get that by doing e.target, where E is the event object passed in to your callback. I wrap that to get access to the jQuery stuff on it, and I call .find output. So find, remember, goes from the form to find any descendant, which is an output, instead of the output, so you can assume there's one, and I change its text contents to the words no signature. So that's the second sentence. Replace the contents of the output element inside that form with no signature. And then we also need to prevent the form from being submitted. That's something you can also do using the event object. You can call the prevent default action on any event, and that stops the browser from doing whatever it would have done otherwise. So for a form submission, it'll prevent the submit event from occurring, so it'll prevent the browser from submitting it. If it's a click on a link, then it'll prevent, navigating to a new page or whatever else you would have done. I saw some questions. Yes.
If there were two outputs, would it still work?
This would change both of them. So typically when I put this sort of thing on the midterm, I'll give you an actual snippet of the HTML. So you'll be able to immediately answer questions like how many. I wouldn't quite be able to fit that on the slide. Yes.
Is submit the only one that meets the event parameter in the Lambda expression?
Every single callback receives an event parameter if you want one. So on the previous callback or event handler example here, we did not put an E between the parentheses, but it existed. We just didn't call it E. If you want, you could put an E over here and then call E.prevent default. And that'll prevent whatever the default action would have been of clicking on the toggle.
But whenever you do use an E, you need to do prevent default.
No. You just have an event. There's always an event object. If you want one, you can always put an E as the first argument. And it has a bunch of stuff in it. The most useful stuff, the only stuff that I've talked about in this class that you might get from the event object are E.target. That's the specific element on which the event was raised. So here, this is super important, right? There might be more than one form on the page. I often see students make this mistake, where over here they write $form, and then in here they write $form. If you do that, then for any form, you will change all forms. But here, I select any form, and then whichever one it's clicked on is E.target. So here, this could be more than one form, but this E.target is a single element, so I'm only looking inside that one single form for output elements. So yeah, the only thing that I've taught you in this class that you can do with an E, or you can do E.target, and you can do E.prevent default. But actually, event objects have like 40 fields, and there's a bunch of nonsense in there.
So to distinguish between jQuery and JavaScript here, it's anything with the $sign is querying the HTML page, it's using jQuery, and then JavaScript is running. So there's some logic on that.
Yeah. So here, when I write $E.target, the event object that comes from the browser, and so it has a native HTML element object. And when I call $sign on it, that's going to wrap it into the jQuery API. Other questions about this kind of block of code?
Where will be delegate for the sum up and the sum div element? Because if they have the sum div element, this function will be delegated for the sum div element. You said when the function up and sum form.
Okay, I'm not 100% sure what the question is. In this case, we're not creating any new elements. We're just changing the text contents of one of the existing elements. That's just what this question asked for. But you totally could, if the question asked you to create new elements, then over here you can create an element and append it to some other element. So, like, Here, I'm gonna duplicate this slide. Oh, no, take it, please. So let's change it to add an output element. Okay, so here I've just written a new question that asks you to add an output element. Instead, I'm going to show you how I would do it. Okay, so in this case, we now want to create an output element. And to create an element, you can still use the $, and you just write HTML inside a string. So I created a new element. When I create an element, it is not yet part of the web page. It is just floating around near the web page. So then I'm going to want to do output.text no signature. And I'm going to want to do e.target.append output. Delete a little too much. Okay, so here, different solution to a different question. And by the way, you don't have to remember this, but if you do, or for it, you can actually, this is full HTML, so you can write something like that instead if you like. Any questions about either, any other questions about either version? Yes.
Could you make the slide bigger?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, they were full screen and then I went to the thing. Yes.
Sorry, I just got one more. So
That's
if the signature isn't Joanne Smith, it changed the output to no signature. And then if you were to go change it back to the right string, it would fail that if statement and then it would just go back to the default text.
Well, if you, okay, so you're saying, let's suppose first I try to submit the form, but I don't have the signature right.
Yeah.
So it puts the word no signature. Then I change the signature to Joanne Smith. Now I try to submit the form again. Event handler fires one more time. The first thing it does, it gets the signature element's value. But this time it is Joanne Smith. So this conditional is false. So we don't execute the if statement at all. Now we're over here. Then we finish the event handler. At no point did we call e.prevent default, right? That was inside the if statement, which we skipped. So now the browser will perform the default action. The default action when you submit a form is to like make a get or a post request to somewhere and load that web page. So what the user will see is that they first type in, I don't know, Bob Smith. Then they try to submit, it doesn't submit, they get an error message, they fix it to say Joanne Smith, they press the button again, and the browser navigates to a new page to handle the form submission.
Okay, yeah.
Cool. Other questions? There's definitely a sizable amount of JavaScript on the test, and you're going to be expected to write stuff like this. So like this, I think would probably be like an 8-point question if it were on the final. Now this question is not on the final.
How many points is that?
It's out of 110. Probably the way to think about it is a point is how long I expect you to work on the problem in minutes. So an 8-point problem is something I would expect you to spend about 8 minutes on. Any other questions? Cool. All right. I'll talk about Ajax. I've got a couple of high-level questions, conceptual questions about Ajax. Give you 30 seconds.
Just how you do it with browsers. Yeah, they have their own like, yeah, one's on there, so the other. Yeah. It's a good answer. Yeah, you use like JavaScript to like have functionalities about it.
All right, so here's my answer. By the way, sometimes students ask why I put really vague questions on the slides. Partly it's to fit them on the slides, and partly if I try to write a question and I can't write one that's sufficiently concrete, I just throw it in the slides. So these are sometimes the rejects. All right, so here's a couple of answers. An Ajax request it is an HTTP request, it's just an HTTP request made from JavaScript. And the main way it's different from like the way browsers normally make HTTP requests, normally a browser makes an HTTP request when it's loading a new page. Whether you submitted a form, it's loading the new page that's the result of the form, or you click on a link, the browser loads the web page you just navigated to. So normally the browser loads a new page when it makes an HTTP request. When the AJAX request, it doesn't. The browser stays on the same page. The AJAX request is performed in the background, and the web page that it loaded is passed to JavaScript. It's not like shown to the screen immediately. Okay, and then this is also the distinction between single and multi-page apps. In a multi-page application, we didn't use that term when we invented these. We just called them applications. So a multi-page application is one where users do stuff by clicking on links, by filling in forms, and by going from web page to web page. In a single page application, the browser stays on the same web page, and the user takes actions by having JavaScript perform AJAX requests or modify the web page. So for example, you can imagine a multi-page style sortable table. You click on the table column, it loads a new page that sorts the table in a different way. Or you can imagine a single page version of table sorting. When you click on the table column, JavaScript just resorts the table without loading any new pages at all. And broadly speaking, single page apps can be better. They're harder to write, but they can also be better because you can respond to the user at this much lower latency. Questions? Yes.
To attempt to answer your question about the refreshing the number of the thing we were just looking at with all the student submissions for your text. So all that's doing,
Yeah, great example.
oh no.
I think we reviewed sessions last time, right? I didn't log out.
It won't.
Yeah, so let's review this one. Oh, we got to 50. Well done, everyone. Okay, that makes me happy. All right, so here, when I hit this button, we can actually pull up the developer tools. I was talking about that earlier. I'm gonna bump the developer tool size a little bit, and I'm gonna click the refresh button. When I do it, you see that it has made an XHR, that's the dev tool speak for AJAX request, to something called get tile status counters, which I assume is a JSON response that has some information. It looks like this one gives information about how many of these tiles there are on the page, and probably it then does it's a pretty complicated application. This is nice. And then it seems to do a follow-up request to a page called tileview/request, and it gets a response, which is another JSON object, and somewhere in here probably it's got a count of all the relevant stuff, like my name, but probably somewhere here it has the number 146. There we go. So you can see here, there's a part of this JSON response that gives all of the data here. So my guess as to how it works is that there's a click event handler on this little refresh icon. When I click it, it creates an AJAX request and changes the tile to this loading indicator. Then when the AJAX request comes back, it changes the tile again to the current status. How exactly it works internally, there's a couple of ways you can do this. This is probably a little more complicated than something I'd ask you to do on an exam. Actually, I thought about it and then didn't. But yeah, in answer to your question, so this internally is using AJAX requests. It is a single page application because you can see that everything else on the page while it's loaded stays accessible, and any state that I have, like I typed some stuff into the search bar, that is maintained when I go from page to page. It'd be harder to do that with a multi-page application, and also this loading time would be spent with the page inaccessible going from page to page instead of being able to manipulate other things on the page. Okay. So let's do some of this. Let's make a GET request to /updates and print the response to the console. It's kind of a simple Ajax example, 30 seconds.
$.
Yeah.
You do like you just put the URL for /update. Things like an object, like an object, like a dictionary.
Yeah, it's a object type thing. I don't know. I think it's like.
Okay. Yeah, so this one's complicated. The Ajax API, it's got a lot of moving pieces. So here is my solution. So to make the request, you do $.ajax. And this takes two arguments. The first argument is the URL as a string. So here I am making an Ajax request to /updates. And the default is a GET request. If you wanted to make a POST request, you would write method : post as a string. So all of those additional parameters go in here, and the most important parameter is the one called success. That's a callback, which will be called when the request comes back. So this is the asynchronous portion. When you run this code, you start the request, then you run this code when the request finishes. And so here, I just call console.log on whatever I got from that web page. Yes?
How would you use those?
Yeah, I don't know first, I guess. Is it valid to put like get rid of the URL in the first bit, then in the object do URL : and then the string? Is that also valid?
I would not do it that way, but we can find out if it's valid. Yes, settings, URL. No, not URL. Next. Yeah, it turns out you can put it in the parameters. So today I learned. Yeah, okay, so apparently it's valid to put URL : /updates in here as well. Not the way I did it, not the way it's in the slides, but totally works. And again, if you teach me something new on the final, that is okay, though you might need to submit a regrade request because the TA is trying to do a quick pass.
Could you use like a weight or like some kind of sync thing?
Yes, so the test will explicitly say if you're not allowed to use a weight. And I didn't say in this somewhat vague question, so it's totally fine. So let's do another Ajax example. This one is a little bit more complicated. It asks you to make a POST request to /thing/new with the data in the form. And then I want you to print to the console if there's an error. You don't have to do anything on success.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the. Okay, so if it takes some one's doing. Yeah, it might just.
All right, so let's step through my solution. Anytime you need to make an Ajax request, you start with $.ajax and the URL. So here $.ajax and then /thing/new/ right here in the first argument. And then in this parameter field, we have a couple of more. First of all, we need to make a POST request. So we put method : post. I believe you can do lowercase or uppercase, but if you always do uppercase, it'll never go wrong. So I recommend just uppercase, but I think they both work. Then this data field is how we can do all of the data inside a form. There's a convenient browser API called form data. And here's how you use it. There's a couple of moving pieces. You have to do new form data and then a form element. So you can see the new form data. The way I get a form element is I select the jQuery element with hashtag the form. That's a jQuery object. Form data wants a native browser object. So I do square bracket 0. That always gets you back a native browser object. So here I've constructed this form data object, and you can put that into the data field, and that will do the right thing to send a post request. You got to do more stuff if there is a file in your form. I will not test you on that in the final because it's not in the study guide. Okay, and last thing, it says print to the console if there's an error. So if you want to do something on error, you pass an error : field to the parameter list. You give it a callback, and here I did console.error. You can of course do console.log. I suppose I wasn't super specific. In case you don't know, console.log prints something to the console. Console.error prints it and gives it a red background. Any questions about these Ajax examples?
What's the bracket 0 thing again? I don't
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah, so let me do that. We're already on the jQuery website, which is a convenient place to test jQuery. So here I have selected, here is a normal jQuery selection. So this returns a jQuery object. That's what this means for some reason. And this is a jQuery object containing a bunch of things. So here I can do jQuery APIs, like, I don't know. Cool, right? If I do square bracket 0, what I get is a native browser element. Remember, we had this distinction between the jQuery wrapped objects, the jQuery wrapped elements, and the normal browser elements. So this is a jQuery wrapped element. It has jQuery APIs. This is an unwrapped browser native element. It does not have any of those APIs. You can see it does not have a function called text, but some of the other browser stuff expect native browser objects.
Didn't the jQuery get all of the paragraph?
That's right. And square bracket 0 got the first one. As you can see, I cleverly wrote this question, which is a final reject. Since it uses an ID, you know that this will only ever select a single element, because IDs are unique. But yes, more broadly, square bracket 0 will get you the first element. You can do square bracket 1 if you want. There's also stuff like, I believe, to array, which will return an array of all of them. There's a couple of these. Okay, I got a question for y'all. I think on Mondays, there's a lot more kind of talking. People are quieter today. Is that just because you're tired? Or just not into it? Or is it, are you not following? Because if you're not following, there's a lot of this stuff on the final. So, you know, get to that.
This is harder, definitely, at least for me.
Okay. Well, there's a bunch of it on the final, so I'm glad we're reviewing it then.
I think the hardest part is just all the bits and pieces you have to remember with Ajax specifically, because there's
Yep.
so many different,
With JavaScript too.
yeah.
Yep. It's tough stuff. But I test you on it, so good to study. Yes,
So you're able to get the 0 index of the jQuery object
that's right.
without having to turn it back to array first?
You do not have to turn it into dot to array first. Yep.
Oh,
You can immediately get the square bracket 0, and that's a native HTML element.
Okay.
Will this give you an error of first two forms?
No.
Or if you didn't tap it, only one form would give an error.
Sorry, what?
If you didn't tap the 0, there's only one form, which gives you.
If you call form data and you pass it a jQuery object instead of a native HTML element, it'll give you an error and it will not be happy. I mean, I guess we can try it.
Or silently.
Yeah, it might, well, it's JavaScript, right? So it might do something horrible. Oh, look at that. That's really nice. It actually gives you an error message. JavaScript can do worse. All right, let's keep rolling. Here I've got a mega complicated Ajax request. This might be like, I don't know, 10 pointer, 12 pointer on the final. So I'll give you a minute. Let's do it without a weight first. Or I don't know, with a weight. Do one of them first. I'll show both solutions.
Yeah, successful. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so let's step through a solution. This one is complicated. I probably wouldn't do anything more complicated than this on the final, but I might do something like this on the final. Keeping in mind that I'm saying this knowing exactly what is on the final. I would not ask you to do it both with and without a weight on the final. That would be 2 questions. I wouldn't give you 2 questions this hard. But in the slides, I'm going to step through both. By the way, I should add, if these ones are tough, if you're struggling with these, sounds like you know what to go study. All right, so let's step through it. So I'm going to go step by step. First things first, we need to make a post request to /thing/new. So here I'm making AJAX request to /thing/new method post. And with these complicated questions, the most important thing you can do is try to work step by step. And that's also helpful for us as TAs. If this is the only thing you write in response to the question, and it's like a 10 pointer, there's like 5 lines of questions, so you'll get 2 points. So going step by step, super useful. It also gets you more partial credit if it comes to that. Okay, we need to send as data the string name equals foo, where foo is the content of the element with ID name. So I'm going to select the element with ID name. I'm going to grab its text contents. That's going to be a string. In JavaScript, you append strings with just a plus. So I get name equals, and then I get that string contents. And I put that as the data colon field. So we've seen one example where data colon a form data object. We have one example where data colon and then a string. And I got a little footnote here about it's a little unclear what exactly the question wants you to do if the text of name has like spaces in it. On the actual final, I would explain that it doesn't, for example.
Could it be like a dictionary or object with a key's name, the value is that, or does it have to be like a straight?
I'm not 100% sure. Let's try it. What's your name?
Chase.
Okay. So we made a network request. And it worked. Yeah. So apparently it can be a dictionary. So I suppose another way that you can answer the same question would be to write and then you also okay, let's continue onward. We sent the data we need. Now we say on success. So if that request is successful, the data should have an ID field. So here I created a callback. I'm naming the result of that first AJAX request. I'm calling it data1. And here I'm doing data1.id to read that ID field. The next step is we need to make a GET request to /thing/ and then that ID. So here I make that URL /thing/ and then that ID. Again, there's maybe some question here about URL encoding, but let's assume that ID is a number here. And this asks for a GET request. You do not have to write method :get because that's the default, but instead of remembering the default, you can just always write it. So we've made a GET request to /thing/ID. And finally, the question asks us to update the title ID element to the name field of the response. So we've made the request to /thing/ID. On success, we're going to call the results of this second request data2. And we're going to update, it's going to select the title field and update its text contents to be data2.name. This is a pretty complicated version. So here is the first version, large scale picture, and I've got, we've got slides for each of them. Any questions about this series of AJAX requests? Yeah, in the back.
Sorry, can you just go over the, let's see, so the step where you make that second AJAX?
Cool. So in the callback from the first request, well, I'm going to make a second request. This second request, the URL is /thing/ and then the contents of that ID field that we got from the first request. So here I use just string operations to construct that second request. Sorry, that second URL. So I use the ID field from the first request, add it to /thing to make the URL, and now this will be a request to like /thing/12. Other questions?
How do we know like what kind of data the successful return?
Yeah, that's a good question. To some extent, I will typically say on the final something like, you can assume all the requests succeed and have their valid data. So, here, the response, you can assume to have a name field. Over here, you can assume the data to have an ID field. So. Other questions? Cool. Let me show you the same thing, but using async and await instead. So here, instead of nested callbacks, with async and await, our code will look more like this. With async and await, instead of passing a success callback, you just don't pass one, and you do await in front of the AJAX request. So I don't have the full version. Let me just do the full version.
Which do you versus?
I like the version without. With async await, but we didn't have async await when I first started programming, and a lot of teams still haven't adopted it. So the first request was a post request to /thing/new. So let's do /thing/new. All right, you're gonna get the backward quotes. Okay, this was a post request with this data that I copied over. Gotta have the correct uppercase, lowercase. I won't have it to on the final. Okay, so now we make that request. I'm not passing a success callback. Instead, I have await here, and so await will return the result of that first request if it succeeds. And then here, I'm going to make a request to /thing/data1.id because that's the same as we did over here in the callback. We get data1.id and we pass it, we add it to the URL. And then finally, I need this is a GET request and there's no other fields, so I can just do that. You don't have to pass the parameters. And again, instead of passing a callback, I am simply going to do await. And then after that second request comes in, I can use data2.name. two options, largely the same code, copied and pasted, is just that one gives you these nested callback style, and one you use these awaits.
You don't have that second half. That's like
Oh, yeah, well,
no, the other one, the other side. You don't have that in the code, it's just the dollar sign title, blah, blah, on the bottom. Yeah,
yeah, this is fine.
is that all?
So again, we're not passing a callback. This is what we want to do after the second request completes. I mean, okay,
Oh, I see.
maybe you would feel better if I wrote this.
Okay, yeah, I understand, okay,
There are just no parameters in that.
that's right, I see.
Okay, so I definitely expect you to feel comfortable reading code in either style and writing code in either style. This is like at the extremes of complexity that I would ask you to do on an exam. So this would be like a 10 or a 12 pointer to write an answer to this question. Again, for one of the styles. Yes.
Can't you write it the same style as the non-await, so then just put a weight in front of it on success?
I'm not sure I understand.
So the same style as the other one for on success, where it says like data and then,
Yeah, you can mix these as well.
or can't you just put an await in front of it and that still do the same thing? Between success colon and data one?
No,
No.
nope, you await the result of the AJAX call. So here I make the AJAX call. And I put await in front of that, and then basically the whole rest of the function becomes your callback. And that's how it's implemented. Yes,
What if the request you're awaiting fails?
then you get an exception. All right, I'm gonna move on, but that sounds like something that you might want to review. If that was challenging, again, kind of at the extremes, but it's something I might ask. Okay, here I'm giving you some jQuery code. It already uses await. And it's asking you to rewrite it so that all of these inner calls are made in parallel. So just think through how you would do that. All right, so let me step through my solution. Here, in the original code, we make a request and immediately wait for it to finish. So we make one request, then pause, make one request, then pause. That's why we make the request, we immediately await it. If we don't want to do that, we will need to make all the requests first. So this loop only makes requests, it does not await them. So we start all the requests in this loop, and then we await all of them after they're all started. So just to walk you through what I did, I took all the code and the await, and I moved it to a second for loop. And this for loop, and in the first for loop, when I make a request, I just add it to an array. So I make a request, I add it to an array, and then later in the second for loop, I await each thing in the array. So we start all of the requests first, stick them in an array, then we wait for all of them to finish one after another. Yes?
Can you not call functions in success? Or like, why couldn't you just put the big thing in success?
You could. Sure, yeah, so another way that you could, yes, I think what you mean is, it would be also valid to write this code like this. I think this is kind of what you were asking.
Yeah.
Yep, this would also be fine, and then you wouldn't need that second for loop. So here we start all of the requests, and each of their callbacks just happens whenever those requests come in. Again, we are not calling the await in between requests. So this would also work fine. This is a case where like the callback style might be more useful in one place and the async await style might be more useful in another place. Questions? All right. I am gonna move on. Oh, what? Oh, there's a question over here. Yes, sorry.
So is using a jQuery function? The using.
Oh, I mean, presumably some other function the user has defined.
Just clarifying, rewriting it so that the requests are made in parallel is the like callback style as opposed to the await, right?
So this will do all the requests in parallel because we explicitly make each of them before waiting for any of them. This also makes all the requests in parallel. Because again, $.ajax only starts the request. The callback is run later, or if you await it.
Okay, so it's not solely this, but this does count.
This does count, yes. Either of these solutions will work. Other questions? Okay, there is a whole second topic to review today. I think this one's a bit shorter, but I'm gonna have to blaze through it a little bit faster, slow down since y'all said this was hard. So let's do it. All right. What is a host name? Give 3 examples and underline the named parts of this long URL. All right. So some examples of host names: google.com, www.cs.utah.edu, en.wikipedia.org. These are all host names. And here I've taken this long URL, I split it up into the pieces. This HTTP or HTTPS part is called the protocol or the scheme. Then this part here is called the host name. You can put a colon and then a port. This URL does not have one. The path is this slash and everything after it up until this question mark. And then the stuff after the question mark, these are often called get parameters. I think the formal term is query string. All right. What kind of objects are these two things and which one do you need? All right. So top one's an IPv4 address. The bottom one is an IPv6 address. Typically, the IPv6 addresses are shorter, but the surefire distinction is that the IPv6 address has double periods or like colons instead of periods. And then which one do you need? You definitely need IPv4. IPv6 is nice, but it is optional. Not all internet service providers support IPv6. A prominent example of one that doesn't is our very own University of Utah.
Is there an implicit 0 between the 2 colons for the IPv6?
Yeah, actually, the rules for IPv6 addresses are like pretty whack. I think there's 8 pieces, and the double colon is any number of zeros. But like, don't quote me on them. IPv6 is crazy. All right, some more networking terminology. All right, so packet route. A packet route is a sequence of IP addresses of routers by which the packet traverses the internet. The analogy that I keep using is it's like directions to get to someone's house. It's a sequence of intersections and roads that you take in order to get to a destination. Same on the internet. A TTL, this is how long a DNS record can be cached. In seconds, technically, that's more than I'd ask you to know. It stands for time to live, which I feel like is very James Bond-esque. You don't have to know that, but this is how long a DNS record is cached. Two prominent types of DNS records are A records for IP addresses. I didn't say that right. A addresses, and the record for IPv6 addresses. There's also a lot of other kinds. If you said CNAME or TXT, you would be right. If you said CRV or like NS, you would also be right, but very obscure. Again, if you want to do a lot of regrade requests, that's a great way to do it. I'll get you in a second. And then a certificate. I know the previous slide says certificate, and this one says TLS certificate, because I realized you might just say, like, I'll get a certificate if I pass this class or whatever. So this is a file that proves that a specific server is the one that owns a domain. The main thing you need to know is that you need one for HTTPS to work and that they are free to get. Questions?
What exactly is a DNS? Let's get it.
A DNS record is the thing that you get the right to change when you buy a hostname. So when you buy a hostname, what that means is you get access to a database of all the DNS records, and you can add one for your hostname, and it can give the IP address of the machine that that hostname should point to.
So why would you add like text versus CNAME versus A?
You would add an A record if you want people going to your site to go to a machine at a specific IP address. That's what you all did in homework 7. If you completed that, you rent an elastic IP address, and then you change your host name to point to that IP address, and then people who want to go to your host name to type it into their browser are going to be sent to that IP address. The other record types, they do other stuff. You don't have to know this in super much detail.
Is the packet just the HTTP request that's like at the OK and 200?
Yeah, pretty much. More specifically, an HTTP request can be really long. So it's broken up into multiple packets that their size varies, but 2 kilobytes is like a reasonable guess as to how big it is. And then like each of these packets is sent across the internet, and in principle, different packets that are part of the same request could still take different packet paths. Other questions? All right. Costs. How much do these things cost? 15 seconds. It can be rough, like it can be interesting. All right. So with these costs, I'll be upfront with you. I'm not going to ask you like cost to dollar and cents. Order of magnitude is totally fine. So a domain, you know how much you spent. I think $5 to $10 a year is a good bet. If you want to buy like Microsoft.com, it's going to run you a lot more, or even like Microsoft.pony. But $5 to $10 per year. So you rent. The domain can never be purchased. It can only be rented. But it can only be rented, and you pay per year. $5 to $10 is a good estimate. IPv4 addresses, you can buy them wholesale for $40 to $60. You can also rent them from Amazon. They're free as long as you attach them to a machine you're paying for. If you don't attach them to a machine, they end up something like $20 per year. IPv6 addresses are totally free. We got loads. No one wants them. Outbound bandwidth, $50 to $100 per terabyte. Now, if you said 20, I'd be like, you got a really good deal, but I'd probably accept it. Inbound bandwidth is free on every major cloud provider. So inbound to your server, you don't have a lot of control over that. That's free. Outbound from your server, you typically have a lot of control over that, and that you'll pay for. And finally, HTTPS certificates, they are free. Okay, let's try to wrap these up. A couple of questions about instances. All right. So an EC2 instance, this is just a virtual machine that you rent from Amazon, and the physical machine it runs on is defined by this instance class. So you'll have an instance class, which will be something like C5. That's like a specific type of physical machine Amazon has in their data center somewhere. And you will rent a specific instance type, which is like C5.large. That combines what kind of physical machine it runs on, plus how much of it you get to use. So like C5.large, I think we looked and it's 1/24 of the actual C5 machine. So you rent a virtual machine, it gets that particular fraction of the full physical machine, and the full physical machine is defined by the instance class. And by the way, I know all these questions are specific to EC2, but the other major clouds work exactly identical. Which is why I'm asking these questions and not Amazon specific ones, not an Amazon chill. If they gave me money, I would be, but. All right, last one, a bare metal instance is one where there's no virtual machine at all. You get the whole machine, there's no Amazon nonsense on the machine at all. It's rare that you'd want to do this, but in certain cases, you want to avoid the virtual machine, certain types of performance measurements, certain types of research, maybe you have very weird security properties that you want to uphold. A burstable instance is one where instead of being allocated one of like, I don't know, 128 CPUs on the machine, you're allocated like 0.1 of a CPU. And the way it works is that you can use 10% of the CPU averaged over a relatively long period. Basically, when you use more than 10%, you spend credits. And when you use less than 10%, you earn credit. So what this does is it caps you to 10% of the machine in the long term. But when a specific request comes in, you can use up to a CPU, but then you can't do that. Questions about the EC2, the network services, etc.
So just one more time, so class is the actual machine it's running on, and instance is how much of that machine you're using.
Yeah, I mean, the terminology is a little complicated. So there's a C5 machine in Amazon's data center. It's named Bob, and it's a C5 size machine. When you rent an C5-large or C5.large instance type, that means that's some particular fraction of the C5 machine. And then your specific instance is your specific virtual machine that is allocated like 1/24 of that C5 machine. All right, and keep running through these just so we get to the end. A couple more conceptual questions.
No, I think it's the opposite. That's how people take our state.
Will be this specific cost on the final?
Anytime I ask for cost or RPS, it can be an order of magnitude.
Okay.
I'm not gonna.
Yes.
Like, you don't need
Yeah,
to be.
okay.
All right, so let's go through my answers to these. The Elastic IP service allows you to rent an IP address and then attach it to a VM, an instance that you're running in Amazon. In Homework 7, the T2 micro instance that you rented, it's free for the first roughly month, but long-term it costs about $9 a month, assuming you keep it up nonstop. And you could sustain about 10 RPS on that machine. You don't have to know the exact numbers. I'm not going to quiz you on like 9 versus 10 or $9 versus $8 versus $7. That's not what I'm about. But if you said $1,000 a month, that would be very incorrect. And these T2 instances, they're burstable. So it can do 10 requests per second long-term because it gets 1/10 of a CPU. But you can spike up to 100 requests per second if a bunch of requests come in. And again, my goal here is not for you to memorize specific things about specific instances, but just to know that like more or less the cheapest thing you can buy gets you 10 requests per second. And then a reasonably cost optimized, like a reasonably normal web server that you host real web services on, that might be something like C5.large, and that might get you 100 requests per second. Questions about these? Yes.
So we needed the IP4 address because only for testing, right? Like normally to host a domain, when you need IP4 stuff, right?
So if you just create an EC2 machine, when you turn it on, Amazon will allocate it an IP address, an IPv4 address, and you can access it from that address. However, when you shut the machine down, Amazon won't keep that request with you, that IP address with you. So when you turn it on next time, it'll have a different IP address. One thing you could do is you could turn on the machine and just tell your friend, if you want to visit my website, go to 137.28.41.17. And that would work totally fine. But probably you don't want to do that because it's a lot of numbers to memorize. And also, if you ever turn the machine off, you got to tell them to rememorize a different number. So what you probably want is you want to assign a permanent IPv4 address that'll never change. And then go into your DNS and say, my CS3550 awesome website that is freaking great.christmas. Yeah. You want that to point to that IPv4 address. And then you tell your friend this like .christmas URL, crazy that exists, instead of telling them the IP address. And that's also useful because then you can keep the same domain name and change IP addresses over time. So if you want, maybe later you'll swap in for like a content distribution network, and that might have a different IPv4 address. You'll change the DNS record to point to the new service, which will access all of your stuff.
There's not a way to just point to whatever the current IP address that Amazon.
That's right. That's right. Because yeah, because you can. Other questions? Cool. So again, with these, you don't have to remember the exact number. If you put 8, you get full credit. But 1,000 a month would be the wrong answer. I want you to have a general sense of how much hosting costs if it's like the cheapest possible. I want you to know how much like a normal web server hosting would be. I think these days is the .xlarge, which is obviously more expensive, but this is roughly the kind of thing that you would actually host a popular web service on. I want you to know how many requests per second that gets. By the way, off the top of your head, you can remember there's about 10,000 seconds in a day. So if you can do 10 RPS and you get 100,000 seconds per day, then that's 1 million users per day. So that's a pretty popular service you're running on this fairly small, assuming the users are uniformly spread across the day, which is unlikely. But that's a pretty big service that you can run even on these small instances. Then these big instances, they're about 10 times bigger, and these are more cost efficient per request. Questions? Okay, I think this is the last. Oh no, we got a bunch. All right, well then let's blast through these. I know we're a little over time. I'll stay here until we finish. It's like 3 more sets of these. 20 seconds.
Wow.
All right, so auto scaling, that means that you automatically start new instances if the load increases. So typically the way you set it up, you have something like a load balancer, and it sends traffic to all of the instances that you've started. And then there's something called an autoscaler, which checks how much CPU each of those instances is using. And if the CPU usage starts climbing above, 50%, 80%, kind of depends, then you will start new instances to spread out the load further. You saw an example of that in our capacity planning. So you could go look at this. AMI, it stands for Amazon Machine Image. Machine image is just a frozen version of an instance. And you can make as many copies of those as you want. So one thing that you might do, you might create a single instance. You might set your software up to run on that instance. You might make an Amazon Machine Image, an AMI, of that instance. And then you can spin up as many identical instances as you want. And you can do that to spin up multiple instances of different instance types to test capacity planning. You might do that for auto scaling. So the autoscaler might start new instances that are clones of the existing one instance that you set up correctly. There's a lot of other things you can do with AMIs as well. So like Amazon has AMIs that pre-set up a bunch of software as well. So like if you want an instance where PyTorch is already configured, then there's an AMI for that as well. All right. Here's some software programs I want you to be familiar with. Just in a sentence, in a phrase, what do they do?
That's an popular.
Yes. That's the thing.
All right, so let me go through these. Nginx, I've been calling it a gateway server. If you call it a web server, you call it a reverse proxy, that's also fine. Basically, this web server sits in front of your Django server. It has super efficient implementations of a couple of common things like TLS termination, like static file serving. And so you typically set up a gateway server like Nginx. There's others, Apache, Caddy, etc., in front of your actual application server. Apt, I think it stands for apt package toolkit. Those Linux people.
Yeah.
So this is a program that you use to install software. It's like the Windows Store, but for Linux and without Windows and without Store. Journal Cuddle. This is a command that you use to check system notifications or check log files. If something goes wrong on your computer, there will probably be a message in the Journal Cuddle. You can also look at it to see how many hackers are trying to break into your web server. That's another normal reason that you'd look at it, because those also get logged. SSH, this allows remote connections from your computer to this virtual machine. If you used PuTTY or you used SSH, that's what you were using. PuTTY is just an implementation of SSH for Windows. And then Linux, this is the operating system that you are actually running on these computers. You can, if you want, run an EC2 instance on Windows. Yeah, totally legal, totally works. They cost about twice as much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they gotta pay the big bucks. All right. I think there's not too many of these. 2 Django settings that I want you to know about. List a couple, or at least one thing these 2 settings do.
Yeah, it's nice to go.
Yeah.
All right. So the debug setting. The most important thing this does is it makes Django not show details of errors. So if your application has an exception, or if the user visits a web page that doesn't exist, in debug mode, when debug is true, that's the default, that's what you've been using for most of the class, Django will show a lot of helpful information so that you, the developer, can figure out what's wrong. We don't want to show that information to random people on the internet who are probably trying to hack us and mine Bitcoin on our computers. So when we deploy our stuff to the cloud, we want to set debug to false, give the attacker less information. There's also other stuff that does, so if you mention some of this additional stuff, that's fine too. But the main thing it does is do not show details in the error message. And then allowed hosts. This setting can tell Django to only allow connections from specific computers. The reason you're going to want to do this is typically because you only want the gateway server to connect to the Django server. Basically, you're saying any web requests must first go through your gateway server, Nginx. It is allowed to connect to Django. And you'll do that by setting allowed hosts to localhost. So I only allow local connections, namely from the gateway server. Otherwise, if you didn't do this, people could go to your domain :8000, just access a different port on your computer and talk directly to Django instead of going through Nginx. And you might not want this for a variety of reasons. Partly because just like the site won't work because you probably won't be serving static files, and partly because there might be some security stuff you've configured in Nginx. All right, that is the last review slide I had. Sorry for running a little bit over. Please study. Please test yourself. What do people think? Which one was harder? Who thinks the review A was harder? Literally no one. 1, yes, okay, great. 2, okay, at least some people. Who thought review B was harder? Well, you know which one to look at, folks, okay? I figured this might be the case